In the summer of 1982, somewhere in Siberia, the night sky supposedly turned white. A Soviet natural gas pipeline had ruptured with such violence that American satellites detected the flash from space. There was no bomber overhead, no commando team on the ground, and no conventional explosive buried beneath the pipe. According to the legend, the weapon was hidden inside the pipeline's control system. The Soviets believed they had stolen valuable Western software. What they may have stolen was a trap. The program allegedly waited until it had passed inspection. Then it ordered pumps to accelerate while valves closed, creating pressures the pipeline could not survive. Steel split, gas ignited. A fireball rose over Siberia with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The story has been called the first great cyber attack and one of the most elegant acts of sabotage in Cold War history. But there is a problem. No convincing public evidence proves that this enormous explosion happened as described. There is no agreed location, no reliable date, no released satellite image, no contemporary report documenting a blast of the scale later claimed. The most detailed public CIA history of the operation confirms that defective Western technology reached the Soviet Union, including equipment installed on a gas pipeline. It never says that altered software caused a colossal fireball. So the real mystery is not simply whether a pipeline exploded. It is how a documented intelligence triumph became fused with an unproven legend, and why the truth may have frightened Moscow even more than the explosion. By the late 1970s, the Soviet Union possessed nuclear weapons, intercontinental missiles, advanced aircraft, and a space program capable of astonishing achievements. Yet beneath those symbols of power, its industrial system was struggling. Soviet laboratories could produce brilliant research. Soviet factories often could not turn that research into reliable technology at scale. Quality control was uneven. Production was slow. Microelectronics lagged behind the West. Computers, precision machinery, and advanced manufacturing processes were becoming essential to both economic and military power. The Kremlin could spend years trying to close the gap, or it could steal what it needed. Inside the KGB's first Chief Directorate, Directorate T, managed scientific and technical intelligence. Its officers abroad operated through a network commonly known as Line X. Their targets were not random secrets. Soviet ministries, weapons programs, research institutes, and defense industries submitted detailed requirements. Semiconductors, radar systems, machine tools, aviation technology, computer designs, manufacturing techniques, and anything else the Soviet state could not obtain legally. Line X officers searched for the requested material. They recruited engineers and businessmen, exploited scientific exchanges, used commercial fronts, diverted controlled products, and acquired documents through covert channels. The stolen information then flowed back to Moscow, where specialists evaluated it and distributed it to the institutions that had requested it. This was not a handful of spies collecting trophies. It was an industrial system for importing the future. And for years, it worked. According to a later CIA account, Line X satisfied between 2/3 and 3/4 of its assigned collection requirements. That meant a significant part of Soviet technological planning depended on secrets acquired from the very countries Moscow considered its enemies. The system appeared secure because each officer saw only a fragment of it. Then a man near its center decided to expose everything. Vladimir Vetrov was an engineer, a veteran KGB officer, and a former intelligence operative in France. By 1980, he was working in Moscow with access to Directorate T's internal reporting. Files crossed his desk showing what Soviet agents had stolen, what they were still hunting, which officers were active overseas, and which Western contacts had been recruited or cultivated. Vetrov had once believed his career would rise. Instead, he felt ignored, humiliated, and increasingly disgusted by the system he served. Accounts differ on how much he was driven by political conviction and how much by wounded ambition. What is certain is that he did not flee the Soviet Union. He stayed inside the KGB and volunteered to spy for France. French intelligence gave him the code name Farewell. Between 1981 and early 1982, he photographed and passed a staggering volume of secret material. The collection eventually included roughly 4,000 KGB documents. It identified more than 200 Line X officers operating across Western countries and produced more than 100 leads to recruited agents or useful contacts. Yet the names were only part of the treasure. The documents exposed the architecture of Soviet technology theft, the agencies submitting requests, the products they wanted, the operations already underway, the successes reported to Moscow, and the channels used to move information east. The West was no longer looking at isolated thefts. It was reading Moscow's shopping list. In July 1981, at an economic summit in Ottawa, French President François Mitterrand privately told Ronald Reagan that France possessed a source inside the KGB's scientific and technical apparatus. The material soon reached senior American officials and the CIA. In Washington, the collection became known as the Farewell Dossier. The obvious response was to arrest exposed agents, expel intelligence officers, and close every compromised route. But acting immediately would reveal that the network had been penetrated. Moscow would replace its officers, rebuild its channels, and begin again. Gus Weiss, a technology specialist on the National Security Council staff, proposed a more ambitious strategy. Do not close the door. Control what passes through it. If American intelligence knew what Line X wanted, it could arrange for Soviet collectors to obtain modified products and corrupted designs. The material would appear authentic. Some components might work perfectly during testing. Only later would they fail, deliver false data, or send Soviet engineers down expensive technological dead ends. In January 1982, Weiss presented the idea to CIA Director William Casey. Casey approved it, and an interagency deception program began. This part of the Farewell story is documented. Weiss later described the operation in the CIA's own intelligence journal. American agencies examined Soviet requirements, watched export and licensing channels, cooperated with industry, and prepared altered technology for acquisition by the KGB. Compromised computer chips entered Soviet military equipment. Defective industrial plans affected chemical facilities and a tractor factory. Misleading information touched areas connected to stealth aircraft, tactical aviation, space defense, and other sensitive programs. Flawed turbines were installed on a Soviet gas pipeline. Each corrupted item created two possible victories. If the Soviets failed to detect the manipulation, the technology could waste money, delay production, or damage equipment. If they did detect it, The psychological result might be even worse. Every stolen design would become suspect. Every successful acquisition might conceal a delayed failure. Engineers would have to ask whether a malfunction came from their own factories, from an honest defect, or from an invisible hand in Washington. The attack was aimed not only at machines, it was aimed at trust. Once the deception channels had served their purpose, Western governments moved against the network itself. Information from the dossier helped expose, expel, or compromise about 200 Soviet officers and sources. Line X operations in Europe suffered a devastating collapse. Years of recruitment, access, and institutional knowledge disappeared. That achievement required no explosion to matter. But an explosion was the story the world chose to remember. The most influential version appeared in 2004, when former Reagan administration official Thomas C. Reed published his memoir, At the Abyss. Reed wrote that Soviet agents had acquired pipeline-controlled software from a Canadian company without knowing that American intelligence had inserted a Trojan horse. The altered software, he said, ran normally until the pipeline became operational. Then it changed pump speeds and valve settings, producing pressures far beyond the tolerances of the welds and joints. The pipeline destroyed itself in a blast so powerful that American satellites detected it. It was an irresistible story. The Soviets stole the instrument of their own destruction. The CIA never crossed the border. No American life was risked. The enemy carried the weapon home, tested it, trusted it, and installed it. Newspapers, books, documentaries, and cybersecurity lectures repeated the account. With each retelling, the scene grew sharper. The blast became 3 kilotons. NORAD supposedly feared a nuclear detonation. Trees were flattened for miles. Soviet operators stared at displays that concealed the rising pressure until it was too late. The details made the story vivid. They did not make it verifiable. Reed's account appeared more than 20 years after the alleged event and rested on information he had received from others. When historian Mark Trachtenberg later examined the case, he found that Reed himself acknowledged in 2010 that he did not know whether the reported explosion was actually connected to the Farewell sabotage program. That admission does not prove there was no connection. It does show that the most famous account was less certain than many later versions suggested. The official record leaves the same gap. Gus Weiss openly wrote that the United States had fed modified technology into Soviet collection channels. He mentioned faulty chips, misleading designs, defective industrial projects, and pipeline turbines. Yet he did not describe a software-triggered explosion visible from orbit. That silence is not absolute proof. Intelligence operations can remain compartmented for decades, and William Casey was famous for limiting what even senior officials knew. A covert action designed to be mistaken for an accident might leave no public paper trail. But secrecy cannot be used as evidence for every missing fact. In his 2024 study, Trachtenberg treated the pipeline story with serious skepticism. He noted that Thomas Reed's version was second-hand and highlighted testimony attributed to former CIA Deputy Director John McMahon that no operation causing such a giant explosion had been mounted. At the same time, Trachtenberg stopped short of claiming the historical question was finally closed. A CIA role remained possible, but the public evidence could not establish it. That is the most defensible conclusion. The broad deception campaign was real. The spectacular Siberian Fireball remains unproven. Perhaps an ordinary pipeline accident was later connected to the Farewell operation. Perhaps altered equipment caused a smaller failure that expanded as the story traveled. Perhaps the decisive documents remained classified. Or perhaps a successful program of technological deception gradually acquired the perfect ending. Cold War legends often grow this way. A true operation provides the foundation. Secrecy creates empty space. Memory, pride, and repetition fill it with details. Meanwhile, the confirmed story becomes almost invisible. The Farewell Dossier allowed Western intelligence to map a vast Soviet collection system from the inside. It revealed that Moscow's industrial strategy relied heavily on technology taken from abroad. It enabled the West to contaminate selected channels, dismantle networks, and force the KGB to question the reliability of its own victories. For Soviet intelligence, the real catastrophe may not have been a burning pipeline. It was the discovery that theft no longer guaranteed possession. Vetrov never lived to see the full historical argument. In 1982, his double life collapsed during a violent incident in a Moscow park. He wounded a woman and killed a man who intervened. He was arrested and imprisoned. The espionage investigation eventually uncovered his work for French intelligence. He was convicted of treason and executed in January 1985. His fate resists a heroic ending. Vetrov exposed a system he had come to despise and delivered intelligence of enormous strategic value. He was also responsible for a killing unrelated to that mission. The importance of what he revealed does not erase what he did, nor should the doubtful explosion erase what Farewell teaches. Modern states depend on supply chains more complex than anything Line X exploited. A chip may be designed in one country, manufactured in another, packaged in a third, and installed in systems controlling energy, transportation, hospitals, communications, or weapons. Software depends on libraries written by people its users will never meet. Industrial equipment receives updates through networks its original designers never imagined. Every connection carries an assumption of trust. Sabotage does not need to announce itself with a fireball. A compromised component can produce slightly false measurements. It can degrade performance slowly, shorten the life of machinery, expose a hidden path to an attacker, or fail at the precise moment when failure will look accidental. That is what makes the documented Farewell operation so modern. Decades before the term supply chain attack became common, intelligence officers understood that technological dependence could be weaponized. The Soviet Union built secret routes to bypass Western controls. Once those routes were exposed, they became delivery systems for deception. The KGB had created a pipeline of stolen knowledge. Farewell allowed the West to poison it. Whether another pipeline exploded in Siberia is still an open question. Until stronger evidence appears, the responsible answer is not yes or no. It is that a dramatic claim has been repeated far beyond the strength of the evidence supporting it. But strip away the legend, and the remaining story is chilling enough. One disillusioned officer carried thousands of pages out of the KGB. An international espionage system was laid bare. Western agencies learned what their enemy wanted, placed corrupted technology in its path, and then destroyed much of the network that collected it. The Soviet Union believed it was stealing shortcuts to the future. it could no longer know which of those shortcuts led into a trap. The most dangerous weapon is not always the one an enemy forces into your system. Sometimes it is the one you steal, inspect, trust, and install yourself. Do you think the Siberian explosion was a real operation whose evidence remains hidden? Or a Cold War legend built around a genuine deception campaign? Tell us in the comments. And subscribe to The Modern Ledger for more stories from the secret wars that shaped the world we live in now.